The moment everyone laughed was the moment I realized I was the only person who understood something was wrong. My name is Margaret Collins. I am 68 years old, and until that Saturday afternoon, I believed I understood exactly who my younger brother was. Richard had always been the kind of man who hid bad behavior behind a smile and called it humor. If someone felt hurt, he would shrug and say people were too sensitive. If someone complained, he would insist it was only a joke. Most of the family accepted that explanation because it was easier than confronting him. For years, I did the same. The gathering took place at my nephew's backyard barbecue in suburban Ohio. It was one of those warm summer afternoons when children ran through sprinklers, hamburgers sizzled on the grill, and relatives gathered beneath large shade trees sharing stories. Nothing about the day seemed unusual. I arrived carrying a bowl of homemade potato salad and spent the first hour chatting with cousins I had not seen in months. My daughter Emily sat beside me for part of the afternoon, telling me about her latest work project. Everything felt normal, comfortable, familiar. Looking back, that might be why what happened next felt so shocking. Richard was in an unusually playful mood. At least that was how everyone described it later. He spent most of the afternoon teasing relatives, making sarcastic comments, and drawing attention to himself. People laughed because that was what they always did. Around 4 o'clock, several of us were standing near the patio discussing old family vacations. I remember turning slightly to reach for my iced tea. A second later, I felt a sudden impact from behind. It was not enough to send me flying across the yard, but it was enough to throw me off balance. My foot slipped awkwardly on the edge of the patio, and I stumbled hard before catching myself. A sharp pain shot through my neck and shoulder. For a moment, everything went still. Then came the laughter. Richard was laughing. A few cousins laughed too, assuming it was harmless horseplay. Someone joked that I needed better reflexes. Richard raised his hands and said the words I would hear repeatedly over the following weeks. Come on. It was just a joke. I forced a smile because I did not want to create a scene. That was another bad habit I had developed over the years. Keeping the peace. Ignoring discomfort. Pretending things were fine when they were not. But as the conversation resumed, I noticed something troubling. The pain was not fading. It was growing. Emily immediately noticed the expression on my face. She asked if I was all right. I told her I was fine because that was easier than explaining what I was feeling. The truth was that a dull ache had settled into my neck and upper back. It was not unbearable, but it felt wrong. Different. By the time the barbecue ended, I was moving much more slowly than usual. Emily offered to drive me home, but I declined. During the 20-minute drive back to my house, the discomfort became impossible to ignore. Every time I turned my head, I felt stiffness and pressure. I told myself it would improve after a good night's sleep. After all, people my age sometimes feel sore after minor accidents. That explanation sounded reasonable. Yet deep down, something kept bothering me. It was not only the pain. It was the way everyone dismissed it. The way Richard laughed. The way the family immediately accepted his version of events. That evening, I sat alone in my living room with an ice pack against my shoulder. Outside, the sun disappeared below the horizon. Inside, the ache continued spreading across my neck. I tried reading a book. I tried watching television. Nothing distracted me for long. One thought kept returning. What if this was not as minor as everyone believed? At the time, I had no idea that the push would eventually lead to a discovery far more frightening than the fall itself. The next morning, I expected to wake up feeling better. Instead, I woke up feeling older. The stiffness in my neck had spread overnight, reaching down into my shoulders and across my upper back. Even sitting up in bed required more effort than usual. For several minutes, I remained still, hoping the discomfort would ease once my muscles loosened. It did not. I carefully swung my feet onto the floor and stood. The moment I turned my head toward the window, a sharp ache reminded me of the previous afternoon. I told myself it was probably normal. After all, people recover from minor falls every day. Yet something continued bothering me. The pain felt deeper than a simple strain. Throughout Sunday, I tried to continue with my routine. I watered flowers on the back patio. I folded laundry. I prepared meals for the week. None of those tasks were difficult, but each movement seemed to trigger a new wave of discomfort. By lunchtime, I finally called Emily. She answered on the second ring. Before I could say much, she asked how I was feeling. The concern in her voice told me she had been thinking about the incident too. I admitted that the pain had not improved. In fact, it seemed worse. Emily immediately suggested visiting an urgent care clinic. I resisted. Like many people my age, I had a habit of waiting things out. Emily was not convinced. She reminded me that neck injuries should not be ignored. Eventually, I promised her I would call my doctor if the symptoms continued through Monday. That evening, Richard called. For a brief moment, I thought he might be checking on me. Instead, he laughed about the barbecue and repeated the same explanation everyone had already accepted. He said people were acting as if he had committed a crime when all he did was play around. Then he told me I should stop worrying because nothing serious had happened. I listened quietly. What struck me was not what he said. It was what he never asked. He never asked how I was feeling. He never asked whether I had been hurt. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. After hanging up, I felt strangely disappointed. Not angry, just disappointed. Monday arrived, and the pain remained. If anything, it had become more noticeable. While making breakfast, I accidentally dropped a coffee mug because a sudden spasm traveled through my shoulder. That finally convinced me to contact my physician. The earliest appointment available was the following afternoon. The receptionist assured me it was probably precautionary, but she agreed I should be evaluated. On Tuesday, Emily insisted on driving me. During the appointment, Dr. Stephen Harper performed a thorough examination. He asked detailed questions about the incident and carefully checked my range of motion. Several times, he frowned slightly while taking notes. That expression immediately caught my attention. Doctors try not to alarm patients unnecessarily, but they also struggle to hide genuine concern. When the examination ended, he sat across from me and explained that most likely I had sustained a soft tissue injury. However, he wanted to investigate further because certain symptoms were not improving as expected. Hearing that made my stomach tighten. Emily asked whether additional imaging might be necessary. Dr. Harper nodded. He recommended several tests and suggested that an MRI might provide a clearer picture if symptoms persisted. I remember feeling relieved at first. An MRI sounded routine, sensible, practical. As we left the office, Emily squeezed my hand and told me everything would be fine. I wanted to believe her. Yet as we walked across the parking lot beneath the bright afternoon sun, I could not shake a strange feeling. The pain was not getting better. And for reasons I could not explain, I had begun to suspect the real problem might have nothing to do with the fall itself. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. Dr. Harper had not seemed alarmed. Emily kept reminding me that most injuries improve with time. Even Richard, during a brief text exchange, insisted I was worrying too much. Yet every morning when I woke up, the same uncomfortable reality greeted me. The pain was still there. Some moments felt better than others, but the overall pattern never changed. If anything, a new layer of fatigue had begun creeping into my daily life. I noticed it while doing ordinary things. Walking through the grocery store left me unusually tired. Carrying a basket of laundry upstairs required more effort than it should have. One afternoon, I sat down in my favorite chair intending to read for an hour and somehow fell asleep before finishing a single page. At first I blamed stress. After all, the incident at the barbecue continued replaying in my mind. But deep down, I sensed something else was happening. A week after my appointment, Dr. Harper's office called. The nurse explained that because several symptoms had persisted longer than expected, he wanted me to schedule the MRI. I thanked her and hung up. Then I stared at my phone for several minutes. The truth was that I did not want the test. Not because I feared the machine or the procedure. I feared uncertainty. As long as I avoided the MRI, I could continue believing everything would eventually return to normal. Once the test happened, answers would follow. And answers sometimes change lives. That evening, Emily stopped by after work. She immediately noticed my mood. Mothers often think they hide things well from their children. We rarely do. After listening to my concerns, she sat beside me at the kitchen table and spoke with a calm confidence I had always admired. She reminded me that information is never the enemy. Ignoring problems does not make them disappear. Delaying answers only delays solutions. Then she looked directly at me and asked a simple question. If this were me, what would you tell me to do? I laughed because I already knew the answer. I would tell her to get the MRI. I would tell her not to postpone something important out of fear. Sometimes the advice we give others is the advice we need ourselves. The following morning, I called and scheduled the appointment. The earliest available slot was 4 days later. Once the date appeared on my calendar, I expected to feel relieved. Instead, I felt nervous. Every day leading up to the appointment seemed unusually long. My imagination worked overtime. One moment, I convinced myself nothing serious was wrong. The next moment, I wondered whether the doctors suspected something they had not yet shared. Richard remained completely unconcerned. During another family phone call, he joked that I would probably receive an expensive report telling me to rest more. Several relatives agreed. Nobody seemed worried. Their confidence should have comforted me. Somehow it did not. Finally, the morning of the MRI arrived. Emily drove me to the imaging center before sunrise because traffic was lighter that way. The building looked ordinary from the outside. Clean, professional, unremarkable. Inside, the waiting room was quiet except for the occasional turning of magazine pages and distant conversations behind closed doors. After checking in, I completed paperwork and waited to be called. My hands felt colder than usual. When the technician finally appeared and led me toward the imaging area, I took a deep breath and followed. I remember telling myself that by the end of the day, this entire situation would probably seem silly. I would have answers. I would begin recovering. Life would move forward. At least that was what I believed as the machine began its work. What I did not know is that the scan was about to reveal something none of us had expected. And within days, a phone call would arrive that would change the entire direction of my life. 2 days after the MRI, I finally began relaxing. That surprised me because I had spent nearly 2 weeks worrying about every possible outcome. Once the test was over, however, life seemed ready to return to normal. The imaging center told me results would be forwarded to Dr. Harper, and I assumed I would hear something during my next appointment. That sounded routine. Predictable. I tried focusing on other things. I cleaned the house. I caught up on errands. I even spent an afternoon working in my garden, although I still tired more easily than usual. The pain in my neck remained, but it no longer felt like the center of my world. Looking back, that brief period of calm now feels almost surreal. It lasted less than 48 hours. The phone call came on a Thursday morning just after 10 o'clock. I was folding towels in my laundry room when my cell phone rang. The screen displayed Dr. Harper's office. At first, I smiled. I assumed someone was simply confirming a follow-up appointment. Instead, the moment I answered, I heard something unusual in the nurse's voice. She sounded polite, professional, and careful. Very careful. She explained that Dr. Harper had reviewed the MRI report and wanted to see me as soon as possible. Not next week. Not some time later. As soon as possible. My stomach tightened immediately. I asked whether something was wrong. There was a brief pause before she answered. She said the doctor preferred discussing the findings in person. Anyone who has ever received that kind of response knows how unsettling it feels. If everything is normal, medical offices usually say so. They do not rush appointments. They do not become vague. They do not ask patients to come in immediately. After ending the call, I sat down at my kitchen table and stared out the window. The trees in my backyard moved gently in the summer breeze. Everything outside appeared perfectly ordinary. Inside my head, nothing felt ordinary anymore. I called Emily. Within seconds, she could hear the concern in my voice. She asked what happened, and I repeated the conversation exactly as I remembered it. There was a long silence. Then she told me she would take the afternoon off work and drive me to the appointment herself. I appreciated that more than she knew. The next several hours felt endless. My imagination worked against me. Every possibility seemed worse than the one before it. Yet even then, I remained convinced the discussion would somehow relate to the fall. Maybe the MRI found a more serious injury. Maybe there was damage requiring therapy. Maybe recovery would take longer than expected. Those explanations made sense. What never crossed my mind was that the scan might reveal something completely unrelated. When Emily picked me up, neither of us spoke much during the drive. We both pretended everything was fine. We both failed. The moment we arrived at Dr. Harper's office, I noticed something else unusual. We were taken back almost immediately. No waiting room delay. No stack of magazines. No long wait beneath fluorescent lights. A nurse escorted us directly into a consultation room. That was when my anxiety truly began growing. A few minutes later, Dr. Harper entered carrying a folder. His expression was calm, but not casual. He sat across from me and opened the file. Then he said something I will never forget. He explained that the MRI did show minor inflammation consistent with the fall. But that was not why he wanted to see me. My heart began pounding. He turned a page and continued. During the scan, radiologists noticed an abnormal area that appeared unrelated to the injury. It required further evaluation, additional testing, additional imaging. The room suddenly felt smaller. Emily reached for my hand. I remember looking at the doctor and asking the only question that mattered. "Are you saying the fall is not the problem?" Dr. Harper nodded slowly. Then he gave the answer that changed everything. "Margaret, the MRI may have uncovered something that has been developing for a long time, and frankly, it is fortunate we found it now." For several seconds after Dr. Harper finished speaking, I could not think clearly. His words seemed to hang in the air between us. Fortunate we found it now. That phrase repeated itself over and over in my mind. I had walked into the office expecting a discussion about a neck injury. Instead, I was hearing that the MRI had uncovered something entirely different. Something that may have been present long before the barbecue. Emily squeezed my hand tighter. I could tell she was trying to remain calm for my sake. Dr. Harper continued explaining that the scan revealed an abnormal area requiring additional evaluation. At this stage, he stressed that nobody was making conclusions. More information was needed. More imaging. More testing. More answers. Yet his careful choice of words told me everything I needed to know. This was not routine. This was significant. The drive home felt strangely quiet. Emily occasionally asked if I was all right, and I answered yes, even though I was not sure that was true. My mind kept drifting back to the same thought. What if I had never fallen? What if I had ignored the pain? What if I had canceled the MRI? Those questions followed me all afternoon. By evening, several family members had learned that additional testing was being scheduled. Emily informed a few relatives because she felt someone should know what was happening. The reactions were mixed. Some offered support. Others offered reassurance. Richard called later that night. For the first time since the barbecue, his voice sounded different. Less confident. Less dismissive. He asked how I was feeling. The question should have comforted me. Instead, it felt strangely late. I explained only the basics. Additional testing was needed. Doctors were investigating something unrelated to the fall. Richard grew quiet. Then he said something unexpected. He admitted that he felt bad about the incident. Not because he believed he caused the medical problem. Because he worried that his behavior had contributed to everything that followed. I did not know how to respond. Part of me appreciated the concern. Another part remembered how easily he had laughed when I was hurt. The next 2 weeks became a blur of appointments. Blood work. Consultations. Additional scans. Every time the phone rang, my heart jumped. Every time a new appointment appeared on my calendar, my anxiety increased. Through it all, Emily remained beside me. She drove when necessary, took notes during appointments, asked questions I forgot to ask myself. Looking back, I do not know how I would have managed without her. Eventually, the day arrived when Dr. Harper finally had enough information to provide real answers. Emily accompanied me to the appointment. Neither of us spoke much in the waiting room. We simply sat together listening to the distant sounds of medical staff moving through hallways. When the doctor entered, his expression immediately told me the uncertainty phase was ending. He sat down and carefully reviewed the findings. Then he explained that the abnormality appeared to be a serious condition that had likely been developing quietly for years. Fortunately, it had been discovered at an early stage. Those last words mattered more than anything else. Early stage. Treatable. Manageable. Hope still existed. As the discussion continued, I learned something remarkable. Many of the symptoms I had blamed on aging over the previous year suddenly made sense. The fatigue. The reduced stamina. The occasional discomfort I dismissed as normal. None of those signs seemed alarming on their own. Together, they formed a pattern that nobody recognized until the MRI revealed it. When the appointment ended, I walked outside feeling overwhelmed but strangely grateful. I was frightened by the diagnosis. Anyone would be. Yet I also understood something important. The fall did not create the problem. The fall exposed it. Without that chain of events, the condition might have remained hidden much longer. And according to the doctors, time mattered. As Emily and I stood in the parking lot beneath the afternoon sun, she wrapped her arm around my shoulder and quietly said something I will never forget. "Mom, as strange as this sounds, that MRI may have saved your life." The weeks following the diagnosis changed the rhythm of my life completely. Suddenly, my calendar revolved around specialists, follow-up evaluations, treatment discussions, and carefully planned appointments. Every conversation seemed to include unfamiliar medical terms. Every day brought new information. At first, I felt overwhelmed. There is something deeply unsettling about learning that a serious condition has been quietly developing inside your body while you continue living what appears to be a normal life. Yet alongside the fear, another feeling slowly emerged. Gratitude. Every specialist I met repeated the same basic message. The condition was serious, but it had been discovered early. Timing mattered. Early detection created options. Early detection improved outcomes. Early detection gave me opportunities that might not have existed a few years later. Hearing that repeatedly began changing the way I viewed everything that had happened. Instead of focusing entirely on what frightened me, I started recognizing what could have been much worse. Emily noticed the change before anyone else. During one appointment, she smiled and told me I seemed stronger than I had been since the barbecue. At first, I disagreed. Then I realized she was right. Physically, I still felt tired. Emotionally, however, something had shifted. Uncertainty was slowly being replaced by purpose. For the first time in weeks, I knew what I was facing. I knew what needed to be done. And I knew I was not facing it alone. Family reactions continued evolving as the reality of the situation became clearer. Relatives who initially dismissed the incident as harmless suddenly viewed it differently. Not because they believed the push caused the condition. Everyone understood it had not. What changed was their understanding of consequences. A moment they considered insignificant had unexpectedly led to a life-changing discovery. Conversations at family gatherings became noticeably quieter whenever the topic arose. People seemed unsure how to discuss it. Richard struggled more than anyone. He called frequently. Sometimes he asked about appointments. Sometimes he asked about treatment plans. Sometimes he simply checked in. His concern appeared genuine, yet there was also something else beneath it. Guilt. I could hear it every time he spoke. One afternoon, he stopped by my house carrying groceries. As we unpacked bags in the kitchen, he finally said what he had been avoiding for weeks. He admitted that he wished the barbecue had never happened. He admitted that hearing about my diagnosis made him rethink many things. Not only his actions that day, but his behavior over the years. I listened quietly. There was no anger left in me. Life had become too complicated for anger. What surprised me was realizing that the diagnosis had exposed more than a medical condition. It had exposed family dynamics that nobody examined before. Patterns of disrespect. Casual dismissiveness. Old habits disguised as humor. Things people tolerated because confronting them felt uncomfortable. Suddenly, those behaviors no longer seemed harmless. A few weeks later, I attended another consultation with Dr. Harper. The appointment went well. Treatment plans were progressing exactly as expected. Before leaving, I thanked him for ordering the MRI. He smiled and reminded me that medicine often works in unexpected ways. Doctors search for one answer and sometimes discover another. Then he said something that stayed with me long after I left the office. "Margaret, sometimes what feels like the worst interruption in life ends up becoming the reason we find what needed attention all along." Driving home that afternoon, I thought about those words. For weeks, I had viewed the barbecue as the beginning of a problem. Maybe it was also the beginning of a solution. The fall revealed pain. The pain led to testing. The testing revealed the condition. And the diagnosis created a chance to act while action still mattered. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I understood something important. I was no longer asking why this happened to me. I was asking what I intended to do with the opportunity one had been given. And for the first time since everything began, the answer felt surprisingly clear. As treatment moved forward, something unexpected began happening inside my family. The medical situation remained serious, but the emotional landscape around it started changing in ways I never anticipated. For years, Richard had occupied the role of family entertainer. He was the person who made jokes, controlled conversations, and rarely faced consequences when those jokes crossed a line. Most relatives accepted that dynamic because challenging it often felt exhausting. Now, for the first time, people were looking at him differently. Not with hostility, with reflection. The barbecue incident had become impossible to separate from everything that followed. Again, nobody believed he caused my condition. The doctors were very clear about that. Yet many family members began recognizing something else. The problem was never the medical diagnosis alone. The problem was how quickly everyone laughed when I was hurt. The problem was how easily my discomfort had been dismissed. The problem was how often respect had been sacrificed in the name of humor. One Sunday afternoon, our extended family gathered for a birthday celebration. It was the first major event since my diagnosis. As I walked into the room, I noticed an immediate difference. People greeted me warmly. They asked genuine questions about my health. They listened carefully when I answered. Nobody rushed the conversation. Nobody changed the subject. It felt strange because I was not accustomed to receiving that level of attention. During lunch, Richard sat across from me. In previous years, he probably would have made a joke to lighten the mood. This time he remained unusually quiet. Several times I caught him watching me as though he wanted to say something but could not find the right words. Eventually, after most relatives moved into the backyard, he approached me privately. We stood near the kitchen window looking out at the children playing outside. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Richard took a deep breath. He admitted that he had spent weeks replaying the barbecue in his mind. Not because he believed it caused the diagnosis. Because it forced him to confront behaviors he never examined before. He said something that surprised me. He admitted that he often treated me as though I would always tolerate whatever he did. As the older sister, I had spent decades smoothing over conflicts, accepting apologies, and keeping peace within the family. Richard realized he had come to expect that forgiveness automatically. Hearing those words felt strangely validating. Not because I wanted him to feel guilty. Because I wanted him to understand. There is a difference. For years, I convinced myself that certain comments and behaviors were harmless. Looking back, many of them were simply disrespect disguised as humor. As our conversation continued, Richard apologized. It was not dramatic. There were no tears. No grand speeches. Just a sincere acknowledgement that he had often failed to consider how his actions affected other people. I appreciated that more than any emotional performance could have achieved. Later that evening, Emily and I sat on my back porch watching the sun set behind the trees. We talked about how much life had changed in such a short period of time. She smiled and pointed out something I had not noticed. Before the diagnosis, most family conversations revolved around convenience. Now they revolved around connection. People called more often. They checked in. They listened. The situation had exposed vulnerabilities that many of us spent years avoiding. In a strange way, it brought honesty into places where politeness once lived. That night, after Emily left, I found myself thinking about the difference between being noticed and being valued. For a long time, I accepted being the dependable person who quietly supported everyone else. I rarely asked for recognition. I rarely expected appreciation. Yet this experience taught me something important. Support should never be invisible. Kindness should never be taken for granted. Respect should not depend on a crisis. As I prepared for bed, I realized the diagnosis had uncovered more than a hidden medical condition. It had revealed truths about relationships that had been sitting in plain sight for years. And the deeper those truths became, the clearer it was that the real story was no longer about a fall. It was about what the fall forced all of us to finally see. Several months after the diagnosis, my treatment plan had become part of everyday life. Appointments no longer felt frightening. They felt familiar. The uncertainty that once dominated my thoughts gradually faded, replaced by routines, goals, and measurable progress. Every encouraging update from my doctors strengthened something inside me that had nearly disappeared during those first difficult weeks. Confidence. Not confidence that everything would be easy. Confidence that I could handle whatever came next. During that time, I also began noticing changes within myself that had nothing to do with medicine. For years, I had been the person who quietly accepted things. If someone interrupted me, I stayed silent. If someone made a disrespectful comment, I laughed it off. If someone crossed a line, I convinced myself it was not worth discussing. Looking back, I realized those habits did not create peace. They created permission. Permission for other people to continue behaving the same way. One evening, Emily and I were sorting through old family photographs at my dining room table. We laughed at hairstyles from decades earlier and shared memories connected to faded snapshots. Then we came across a picture taken nearly 15 years ago during a family reunion. In the photograph, Richard stood beside me smiling. At first glance, it looked completely ordinary. But as I studied the image, a memory resurfaced. I remembered the joke he made that day at my expense. I remembered everyone laughing. I remembered smiling even though I felt embarrassed. What surprised me was not the memory itself. It was how many similar memories suddenly followed. Different years, different gatherings, different comments. Yet the pattern remained remarkably consistent. Emily noticed my expression and asked what I was thinking. I told her the truth. The barbecue was not an isolated event. It was simply the first time the consequences became impossible to ignore. For decades, our family treated certain behaviors as harmless because nobody wanted conflict. We confused familiarity with acceptability. We assumed that because something happened often, it must be normal. The diagnosis did not create those realizations. It simply gave me enough distance to finally see them clearly. A few days later, Richard invited me to lunch. It was the first time we had spent significant time together without other relatives present. We met at a small restaurant overlooking a river outside town. The atmosphere was relaxed, but both of us understood the conversation mattered. At one point, Richard asked whether I was angry with him. The question lingered between us for several seconds. Then I answered honestly. I told him anger was not the right word. Disappointed had always felt more accurate. Disappointed that so many things were dismissed as jokes. Disappointed that respect often seemed optional. Disappointed that it took a health crisis for people to start paying attention. Richard listened quietly. For once, he did not interrupt. He did not defend himself. He simply listened. That moment may have been more important than any apology. Real change begins when people stop explaining and start hearing. As lunch ended, he admitted something I never expected. He said the situation forced him to examine his own behavior more carefully than ever before. He realized that intentions do not erase impact. A person can mean no harm and still cause harm. A person can call something a joke while someone else experiences it very differently. Hearing those words felt significant because they reflected genuine understanding rather than simple regret. Driving home afterward, I found myself thinking about how strange life can be. One unexpected moment had exposed a hidden medical condition. That same moment had also exposed years of unhealthy family patterns. Neither discovery was comfortable. Both were necessary. Sometimes people imagine healing as a straight line. My experience taught me otherwise. Healing often involves uncovering truths that were hidden beneath the surface for years. The medical diagnosis revealed one truth. The family conversations revealed another. Together, they changed how I viewed myself and the people around me. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt something that had nothing to do with treatment plans or test results. I felt respected. Not because people felt sorry for me. Because they finally understood what should have been obvious all along. Nearly a year after the barbecue, I found myself standing in the same backyard where everything began. The weather was almost identical. Warm sunlight filtered through the trees. Children laughed as they played in the grass. Relatives gathered around picnic tables sharing food and stories. On the surface, it looked like any ordinary family celebration. Yet for me, it felt completely different. I was different. The previous year had tested me in ways I never expected. It challenged my health, my confidence, my relationships, and my understanding of what truly matters. But it also gave me something valuable in return. Perspective. Earlier that morning, I had attended a follow-up appointment with one of my specialists. The news was encouraging. My treatment plan was working exactly as hoped. Progress continued. The condition that once terrified me was now something I managed with knowledge, support, and determination. There were still challenges ahead, but there was also every reason to believe I would continue moving forward. As I walked through the gathering, relatives greeted me warmly. Conversations felt genuine. People listened when I spoke. They asked about my life rather than making assumptions. The difference was subtle, but meaningful. Respect had become part of the family culture in a way it had not been before. Later in the afternoon, I found myself standing beside Richard near the grill. For a moment, neither of us said anything. We simply watched our family enjoying the day. Then he smiled and shook his head. He told me he still could not believe how much had changed over the past year. I told him neither could I. What happened next surprised me. Richard thanked me. Not for forgiving him. Not for moving on. He thanked me for being honest when it would have been easier to remain silent. He admitted that many of the lessons he learned over the past year came from conversations we never would have had if everything had stayed the same. I appreciated his words because they reflected growth rather than guilt. Growth lasts longer. As the afternoon continued, Emily joined us. Looking at my daughter standing beside my brother, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Throughout every appointment, every difficult conversation, every uncertain moment, she had remained steady. Her support reminded me that strength does not always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it arrives quietly through consistency, loyalty, and love. As sunset approached, I stepped away from the crowd for a few minutes and sat alone beneath the same tree that overlooked most of the backyard. The sounds of family drifted through the evening air. I thought about the version of myself who sat in a living room months earlier holding an ice pack and wondering why the pain would not go away. That woman felt frightened and confused. She believed her story was becoming smaller. In reality, it was becoming larger. What began as an unexpected fall eventually revealed a hidden condition that needed attention. It revealed family habits that needed examination. It revealed relationships capable of growth. Most importantly, it revealed strengths I did not know I possessed. People often talk about life-changing moments as though they arrive with warning signs. In my experience, they rarely do. Sometimes they arrive disguised as inconveniences. Sometimes they arrive through circumstances we would never choose. The meaning only becomes visible later. As the sky turned shades of orange and gold, Emily called me back toward the family gathering. I stood, brushed a few leaves from my clothes, and started walking. For the first time in a very long time, I was not focused on what had happened to me. I was focused on what remained ahead. My health was improving. My relationships were healthier. My future felt open again. The experience taught me that dignity is not something other people give you. It is something you choose to protect. Respect is not something you earn through suffering. It is something you deserve from the beginning. And sometimes the most important victory is not proving someone else wrong. It is continuing to live your life with gratitude, strength, and hope after discovering how much it is truly worth.